Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 105 of Humanity Rising. Virtually every day since May 22nd, Ubiquity University and well over 300 partnering organizations from all over the world have come together to offer a very simple service, a daily open space so that people from around the world can come together to share what it's like going through this extraordinary pandemic that has put us all into some form of lockdown and engaging in social distancing and acutely aware of our health and well-being and wondering about the future of the world at a time where everything we thought was normal has been stopped, turned upside down, and shaken to its roots. Today, they announced that the number of deaths due to COVID-19 has passed 1 million. And countries around the world are continuing to wrestle with what to do. I happen to be in Amsterdam. It has had relatively low COVID-19 rates up to now. But this morning they decreed new restrictions. Amsterdam and Rotterdam are now essentially no-go zones. You can only come in and out of the city if you have sort of an emergency or just cause. In the green room, preparing for this session with the panelists that you'll be hearing in just a few minutes. A couple of them are in California. They're dealing with the smoke of fires that are burning and have been burning for well over a month now in the worst forest fires in California history. And one of the panelists, Lisa Rafael, brother-in-law, has lost his house right outside of Santa Rosa, California. So the world is in turmoil. We need to take this seriously. We need to come together as human beings now, because the amazing thing about the pandemic is it's affected everybody everywhere at the same time, and therefore put the entire world in the same conversation. This is probably the most extraordinary opportunity in our lifetimes. We don't have to talk anybody into anything anymore. Everybody, for the most part, knows what the issue is. And the singular challenge of those of us in the progressive movement, and by the progressive movement, I mean people everywhere that are simply working day in and day out for a better world, as all of you are. I want to thank all of our live streaming partners. There's over 40 organizations that are partnering with us. We're going out to 15, 20,000 people with this session. I want to thank the people on the Zoom call that are here present for the actual session today. All of us together have a historic responsibility to understand that every one of our choices matter, that we need to come together in radical collaboration, and we need to really think through at this critical moment, what are the mindsets that we need to embrace that can empower us to renew the world in a way that will ensure that the human future is more sustainable and more resilient and more abundant, more healthy, and in alignment with natural systems and constraints. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Now I'd like to turn it over to my co-moderator, Sabina von Gafka, who will commence our program. Sabina.
Thank you, Jim. And I also want to say a warm welcome to all of our viewers and all of our streaming partners around the world for also being those catalysts for change and creating the ripples of impact. And also to all the speakers that we have had. I mean, to this day, 105th day we're now at, and that is truly amazing and really creating this platform and space for both dialogue, but also collaborations. A lot of collaborations have sprung out of this, especially in our Zoom chat. We have a really active, reoccurring, and always faithful tribe who are part of the dialogue as much as our speakers. And from there are springing a lot of impactful collaborations around the world. And today's session is about mindsets for change. And we've also talked a lot about the need for changing mindsets, for creating a new narrative, and all that sort of co-entails. And that also demands a lot on us as individuals, as people, and also as leaders, because it's nearly like we're redefining what leadership is. Leadership in this new era of new ways of working, new ways of interacting, new ways of leading. And in turbulent and uncertain times, a committed and value-based and collaborative leadership is really essential. It's essential to navigate us in times of certainty and also in times of uncertainty. And also a lot what this panel would be talking about, that we also need to be able to learn from these times of crisis so that we can take those learnings and navigate a new path to either eradicate or avoid, or at least handle better and more in unity if and or when a pandemic or crisis would arise again. And also remembering that powerful narrative of storytelling, that it is the stories we convey that give us meaning, that give us intention, and that also navigate us towards the future that we wish to create, or the future that we actually are collaboratively creating in our actions and also in our non-actions. So a very exciting panel today. And I wanted to mention a quote that Jim actually said yesterday that I thought was such a beautiful sentence, and that we can sort of have in our minds. And that's the importance to induce ourselves with a vaccine of human goodness. In these times of pandemic and viruses and vaccines, how about that vaccine that we can actually induce ourselves and spread to others, the vaccine of human goodness? So let's have that in our hearts and minds when we do a 1-minute heart coherent meditation, just to align us here and now, to open our hearts, open our minds for this space, 1.5 hours going on. And thank you for being here and joining us. So Richard, please, if we could play the music, and we'll just do some inhales and exhales. You can place your hand on your heart if you prefer, and just arrive here. And just feeling that sense of interconnectedness that we both create in this space, and that echoes out into the ethos of our earth. And with that, I would like to present today's moderator and convener of our panel. She is a pioneer within transformational leadership, and she has a company called Communicore Consulting. Her name is Wilhelm Buckley, and she's an international consultant, executive coach, and speaker, and specializing in personal transformation, complex change, and developing conscious leaders who generate substantive results while evoking wisdom and love in their organizations. So with that, I hand over the word to you, Karen.
Good morning, Sabina. And good morning, Jim. Thank you for that introduction for us today. And good morning to all of you who are on with us today. As I said in the chat, this is such an important conversation, and it's so good to be here together, to be in the coherence of our hearts, to know what our journey is together, how we're in the midst of searching and asking so many hard questions and finding ways to provide nurturance and support and care for each other and our earth, our beautiful earth. In July, Time Magazine had a magazine, the July edition of Time Magazine came out, and the title was something that is still reverberating for me. Front page headline, "One Last Chance, the Defining Year for the Planet." They went on with an excellent series of articles to show how given that scientists have shown us that we have 7 years to create a new future. They began discovering, what does it mean for countries, cities, and people to live in balance with the planet? As we face 1 million deaths from the pandemic, now we're in a constant practice of embracing one disturbance after another, embracing uncertainty. And what's called for is leadership, conscious leadership. And each of you are leaders, regardless of where you live, what you do, the scope of your work. In my definition, a leader is anyone who takes action, who has the willingness and ability to act on that which matters the most to them. So when you connect with what's in your heart, with what matters to you, whether that is serving on the front line as a caregiver in the pandemic, or whether that is environmental action, whether that is political action, whatever that action is that's yours to do, you are a leader and bringing your leadership into the world. As leaders, part of our journey is to notice the growing anxiety that we face and how it's spreading. How many people, how many of my clients, how many of my friends that I speak with who are normally very sturdy sort, very steady, I've found it in myself. There's a destabilization that can occur if we're not clear and consistent in our practices and really staying anchored in a sense of what is possible, of what we can do and what is ours to do. As Jim mentioned, most of us on the West Coast are currently living in fear of wildfires. The sky is orange, the sun is orange this morning. In the southern United States, the eastern United States, you're facing unprecedented storms and hurricanes. Other areas are facing unprecedented heat, drought, the loss of homes, the thousands of songbirds and forest animals, insects and trees that we've lost. It makes me really wonder at the scientists who say that by 2030, we may be facing severe difficulties with climate. I'm at the point of wondering, what will those be? Aren't these severe? Do you consider these mild difficulties? I wonder at China pledging to be carbon neutral by 2060. That's 40 years from now. Do we have this kind of time? And I wonder at people and businesses that are touting mitigation strategies for the problems we'll run into if the world gets 2 degrees warmer, when in many places it's already almost impossible to live. So these global threats that we face at this point that don't stem from the actions of clearly defined individual states, but rather from these diffuse issues that cross sovereign borders: the pandemic, climate disruptions, migration of people and animals, rape as a tool of war, leadership that is not up to the job. These are threats that we face every day. What are the practices that we already engage in that bring us stability, that enable us to move forward each day, to wake each day and come back into our aliveness, back into the coherence of our heart? Those are so important to identify right now, to love, to do them again and again and again, because those practices are what anchor us into the mindsets for change. Over 3 decades, I've been working with system change and working with leaders who are working to change their mindset so that they can guide their teams, their organizations, the country, their county, their city, their nation into positive change. And I have found again and again that the fastest lever for change is to identify and amplify what's working. And today we are in the place where we amplify what's working as we hear from 3 conscious leaders who engaged in conversations and actions designed to wake us up and guide us into even more effective leadership. So Jan Vertefeuille is a senior advisor from the World Wildlife Fund. Elsie Mayo is with Humanity Inc. And Lisa Raphael is a spoken word artist and a grandmother of 7. And all 3 of them have got so much content and richness to share from their leadership and what they're doing. They're all 3 conscious leaders who recognize that we're part of a living system, changed by our choices and our commitments. And they understand that by working together, we can change the design of the past on behalf of a new future, one that sustains a vital earth and all life. So this is the choice that we face: to repeat the past or to create a new future. How do we begin to transform old mindsets, innovate, and design the future for real change? Well, there's 5 steps I'd like to speak to today. The first is to know that we don't know how to solve the mess we're in. Now, that is a heck of a start on a talk like this when I'm supposed to be giving solutions. But we are in messes. It's what my colleague Robert Horn calls messes. Bob taught at Harvard and Columbia and developed something very powerful called mess mapping. It's an extraordinary process and analytic tool for helping stakeholders address what he calls wicked problems. So these are the kind of problems that we face today. They're social messes that are more than complicated, ill-structured problems, because there's no unique, correct view of the problem. And different views come from different value conflicts. And therefore, it means that there's contradictory solutions that different people can see. So we used to be able to say there was an elephant in the room and different people were touching different parts of the elephant. But now we sort of have an elephant in the room that is morphing and changing as we're touching it. And different people are experiencing different rates of change and are getting different information and different input. And the problem is also now that elephant, these messes that we're faced with, are problems that are connected to other problems, and they go across systems. And our solutions are constrained by not only economic constraints, but political, cultural, and ideological constraints. So a solution that seems logical to one group is not appropriate for another group. It doesn't mesh or work with them. So this considerable uncertainty and ambiguity of these continually changing conditions makes it hard to map exactly what the mess is we're in and where the numerous possible intervention points are, and to discover where the many points of resistance are to change. So that was step 1. When we step into knowing what we don't know, we begin to learn together. The second step is to learn to listen for and respond into an emergent future. How do we begin to listen to and respond to an emergent future instead of repeating the past? Well, this is a critical time for humanity. And the way we do that listening is through activating our wisdom. Our personal and collective wisdom is urgently needed, and yet it's not at the forefront of our economic or political or even organizational life. Who's ever had a performance review where they've asked you, how were you wise this year? We need wisdom that helps us make wise, life-engendering, life-enhancing choices each and every day. Wisdom is all around us. We live in a wisdom-rich world. And the challenge and the gift of our practices is that they help us to remove the filters of our pain, the limiting frameworks, the assumptions, the beliefs that we have held on to that have kept us repeating the past, so that we can now, through our practices, begin to appreciate and amplify the wisdom that is there. So what does wisdom look like? And when I give talks internationally, nationally, in corporations, in small companies, associations, I always ask, who can you think of in your life who is wise? One person might say their grandmother. Another person might say a non-anxious, calm presence who was in the midst of all our difficulties, kept connecting people and de-escalating conflicts. Someone else might speak about a leader who was a leader without being any position of leadership. They might speak about a wise leader who clearly lays out expectations, secures agreements, and then steps back and lets people do the work that they need. They tell stories about someone who really listens. And they talk about a leader who welcomes information that she hadn't considered before, even when it's contradictory to what she wanted to be true. Wisdom is all around us, and wisdom is inside each of us. And our capacity to be wise is something that is present and possible every day. And when I'm working with executives and when I'm working with people who want to bring their leadership forward in the world, what I'm listening for is their wisdom. How is their wisdom relevant to the concerning situations that they face, that we all face today? And it's always there, often hidden beneath the details that demand their attention, suppressed by the fast pace they're running, diminished by an uncaring culture, or marginalized as not reality. But when we get into our coaching conversations and I listen for the wisdom, or I get into a meeting and I'm facilitating a meeting and I listen for the wisdom that's there in the team, it's always there. We know it when we hear it. And when we learn to pay attention to it, that wisdom opens a door and it guides us steadily forward, where the bottom line includes people, profit, and planet. The third step is, how do we connect wisdom and love? Because wisdom can be stepped back. It can have a cold quality to it. If we're not careful, it can have a simply objective quality without including the warmth of our humanness. So how do we connect wisdom and love? I'm deeply in this question of love and how we can cultivate love in our lives and how we can cultivate love in our organization, how leaders can lead from love. I've recently written several blogs on that and have an upcoming course, The Power and Gifts of Love, starting October 19th. This conversation about love, how do we bring love into our hearts? And how do we come from love, no matter what is happening in the world? This is the question of our times, because no matter what else is happening, no matter how guilty we might feel at all the different things we didn't pay attention to before this, every step we're to take here and now, if it comes from love, as it comes from love, the effect, the ripple effects will be much better. They will be the kind of thing that we can live into in the future. So the fourth step is to innovate and design the future for real change by building on what's working. So it's in times of disruption that the best in human systems can burst forth. It's where we find our resilience, our grit, our care for others. It's where those qualities of compassion and our core values can come the most alive and be intensely lived. Around here, we're motivated by the wildfires. The US Park Service is beginning to listen to the Native Americans again, who kept the land with their forest and land management practices. And yes, there is racism and suppression of Native American knowledge and millennial practices that must be recognized. And yet, at this moment in time, we have the capacity to turn back to that ancient knowledge, which has been continued to be passed on through the traditions, and come together and lead a way into a better approach to wildfires. In the amount of time I have, I won't go into everything that's possible, but there are so many things that are working in the world, and I encourage you to put them in the chat. You know, Paul Hawken identifies many of them in Drawdown, Damon Gameau in the film 2040. Many of the the Humanity Rising panels have drawn our attention to what's working in energy efficiency, conservation, chemical safety, fashion supply chains, new economic systems like donut economics, protection of the Earth's wild places. Just recently, I heard that Amazon has developed a new climate pledge friendly label that will enable customers to find more than 25,000 products with sustainability certifications. There's a cradle-to-cradle certification that hundreds of companies are using these standards to produce certified carpets, building materials, window blinds, even a new fashion production system where the right materials are chosen from the start. So that when we make a purchase of clothing, we're supporting the longevity of clothing. And when the clothing ends the end of its cycle, it can safely be put back into a technological or biological cycle. It is in our capacity to identify and amplify what is working, because we change best when we're strongest. As human beings, we can change when we, in a sense, give ourselves a surround sound of strength, when we discover the resources that are outside or inside any given system and include our social and cultural assets, our technological assets, our economic ones, psychological and spiritual strengths, our ecological strengths, all of that. If we can keep looking for and finding those strengths and pulling them together and weaving them together, we can begin to address an issue like how climate change interacts with and affects the rate at which we are experiencing pandemics and will be experiencing them in the future. And finally, I want to speak to updating our mindsets. So a characteristic of conscious leaders is that they continually update mindsets. They continually look for the way that their mindsets are constricting them, the way they're holding them back, and they look for what are the results that they're getting that don't really serve them or don't serve the commitment they've made and the mission they're on. And then they back that to look at what is the behavior that drives those results. And they come behind that to look at what is the mindset out of which that behavior comes. And when you can get in touch with those mindsets, often they're very familiar, often they're just the way the world is, it appears, but recognizing that they're an old operating system that's unconsciously influencing our behavior, we can begin to make a change. So in closing, we're all leaders, and we face an unprecedented opportunity and responsibility to protect the planet and protect people from a future pandemic. From the mindsets we've had in the past, we've created a bunch of messes, environmental, economic, and business practices that put us all at risk. And mindsets for change include knowing that we are interconnected, part of a living system. From this mindset, we have a chance to rebalance our relationship with nature, and consciously change the future for the generations to come. Arundhati Roy said, "Another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing." I'd like to introduce now Jan Vertefeuille, who's the senior advisor for the World Wildlife Fund. Jan leads the World Wildlife Fund's efforts to engage the public, change government and corporate policies, and connect the work of World Wildlife Fund directly to the people who live on the front lines of conservation. I'm sure all of you know of WWF and the fine work that they do. They're the leading conservation organization that works in nearly 100 countries to create a world in which people live in harmony with nature. So Jan, if I may, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Karen. It's great to be here with you all today. And I have a few slides, so I'll be sharing my screen. Get it to start full screen. Okay, there we go. So thank you all. And I was heartened to hear Sabine talk about storytelling, because I want to start off with a story that illustrates our broken relationship with nature and how that is coming back to haunt humanity in ways like the current pandemic. And this story starts in one of my favorite places in the world. It's a place called 30 Hills. And this is really a microcosm of what's happening all around the world in many places. Now, 30 Hills is a tropical forest in Indonesia, and it's one of the last big blocks of rainforest left on the island of Sumatra. A lot of the rubber and the pulp and paper and palm oil that's in our everyday products that we use in the US is harvested there on land that was recently rainforest. And 30 Hills also is one of the last places where critically endangered Sumatran elephants and tigers have the potential for surviving over the long term, along with a number of other endangered species. And indigenous people survive here. These are children from the Talang Mamak tribe, and they're attempting to carry on their traditional forest-dependent lives. It's also a perfect example of the link between human incursion into nature and increased disease risk. In 2007, one of the world's largest paper companies built a massive logging road right through the heart of this forest, simply to shorten the drive between two paper mills. And all along both sides of that road, settlements began to crop up. First, individual encroachers' shacks, then whole villages. The tropical lowland forest that is so critical for elephants and tigers got cleared for 50 miles. Then those villages needed to support themselves, so they cut down more forests and planted their own palm oil to sell to big companies. And then they brought in goats and chickens to raise livestock. Then they began poisoning the elephants that were bothering their crops and trapping the tigers that preyed on their livestock. So killing the forest animals for bushmeat to eat or capturing them to sell as exotic pets like this orangutan. Now, one of the biggest causes of epidemics and pandemics is animal to human transmission of disease. This is what scientists call zoonotic disease. When you have human activities increasing in natural ecosystems, it leads to an increase in human-animal interactions of all kinds, like what I described in 30 Hills. And this enables what scientists call zoonotic spillover, when infectious diseases like viruses jump from animals to people. And that's what experts have concluded caused COVID-19, a coronavirus that lives in bats in Asia and that bats have adapted to living with. Doesn't hurt the bats, but that coronavirus mutated and made its way to humans, which haven't adapted to living with it. And this may have happened in a market like this one in China, where live wildlife was sold alongside seafood and vegetables. So you have bats and chickens and other endangered species all warehoused together in unsanitary conditions. And just like us, stressed animals are more susceptible to illness. They shed viruses more, which is what may have happened with bats in this market that were carrying coronavirus. And scientists believe it passed to another species before it infected people. So these wildlife markets are a perfect petri dish for breeding new deadly viruses like COVID-19. So back in 30 Hills, in less than 1 decade, just the simple existence of a road has helped wipe out almost all of the forest left in 30 Hills, outside of a national park and then a forest block that WF fortunately has been able to protect. So the connection between nature and human health is one many of us don't give much thought to, but it is profound. When we break that connection, we suffer the consequences. Almost half of zoonotic infectious diseases in people come from wildlife habitat conversion. Now, we just talked about the wildlife exploitation and land use changes like roads and palm oil plantations. The third big driver of new zoonotic diseases is expanded and intensified livestock production. So agriculture of all types already is the main driver of biodiversity loss. And Global pandemics and epidemics, if you think like SARS, Ebola, avian flu, these are not new problems. What is new and different is this moment in time when the entire world and the entire global economy are bearing the costs of risky wildlife trade and an unsustainable, unhealthy relationship with the natural world. And we can expect many more pandemics if we don't change that relationship. So WWF has launched a global advocacy campaign around a call to action that our future is fundamentally linked with a healthy planet. We're designing a strong scientific blueprint of what is needed to address the drivers of pandemics, like deforestation and agricultural systems that skew the human nature balance. And we need to make sure we're collectively addressing the root causes, and that COVID-19 recovery isn't only about a vaccine. It needs to be about preventing the next one by tackling these root causes. And this needs to be underpinned by recovery efforts that don't leave the most vulnerable behind, like impoverished people eking out a living on the edge of the forest. We need to ensure a green and just recovery for all. So if you see here, what exactly needs to be done? We need to work with governments and corporations, push them, lobby them, urge them to halt deforestation for food and other commodities. This should be a bare minimum for multinationals. No deforestation in your supply chains. And countries that have high risk wildlife trade have to increase their efforts to shut down these spillover hotspots. So China and Vietnam have been two of the worst offending countries when it comes to high risk and illegal wildlife trade. They were also the first to take action since COVID-19. So we now have high level directives in place in both countries, shutting down most wildlife sales. Now this has to be followed up with meaningful enforcement, but more countries need to follow suit. And we need to adopt a food system that protects and conserves nature while ensuring there's enough nutritious food for current and future generations. Now, as individuals, there are a lot of ways to make your voices heard as well. As consumers, you can let companies that you buy from know you want to see meaningful zero deforestation commitments from them. And Congress right now is considering several bills to try to prevent future pandemics. You can go to worldwildlife.org to send a message to your representatives that you want them to address these root causes of pandemics as well in these bills. And if all this seems daunting and expensive, it is, I won't lie to you. But failing to get this right will be so much more costly. But for special places like 30 Hills, the species and the people who depend on them, which is all of us, we will have squandered an extraordinary chance to address the issue if we don't act quickly and collectively to restore a healthy relationship with nature. So thank you for inviting me here today. And Karen, I'll turn it back over to you.
Wow, thank you, Jan. It's a very sobering picture that you put in front of us. I appreciate one part there really opened my mind in a different way when you said that pandemic recovery is not just about a vaccine. It's about restoring nature. It's about addressing the root causes. That is something that we haven't begun to write about, think about, bring into, I mean, that certainly wasn't even part of the conversation that I've seen in most of the things that I've read. I really appreciate World Wildlife Fund and the work that you all are doing with that. Is there anything else on that that would be useful for us to know?
I think there's a lot of things that need to be done, and we are really trying to take a holistic approach, as are many other conservation groups and governments are realizing this as well. You can go to worldwildlife.org to if you really want to dig into the different ways that we can address these root causes. But you know, we're going to face more and more pandemics in the future if we don't address this. And it's not just about pandemics; it's about, you know, fair and just access for everyone to food and making sure that we keep intact forests and that we have thriving species. So there are a lot of reasons to restore that relationship with nature, not just pandemics.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you. The core is the restoration of our relationship with nature and restoring nature. I can see that's one of those messes that I was speaking about in terms of mass mapping, all the different contingencies. Thank you, Jan. I'll go on now to our next speaker, Elsie Mayo. Elsie is somebody that I've known for about 20 years, and I just loved her as soon as I met her. We met through Spirit and Business Global Institute when I was on the board there, and we were participating in the conferences together. And Elsie is a woman on a mission. She always has been, and she always will be. She is empowering high-performing businesses profitably align with the well-being of humanity through Humanity Inc. She's grounded in performance metrics on Wall Street, and she adds the wisdom of the feminine values to humanize capitalism. Elsie is convinced that democratic capitalism is ripe for a systemic leap, one in which a new kind of organization will play a central role. So let me see if I can turn this over now to Elsie. Elsie, if you'll turn your video on. There you are.
There we go.
There we go.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you so much.
I'm glad you're here today.
Thanks so much for that introduction. Thank you, Jan, for your stirring revelations about the relationship of the pandemic and how we engage with the living system. Thank you, Jim, for creating probably the greatest forum since Socrates Symposium for the evolution of humankind in this amazing more than 100-day conversation. And thanks to your entire teams. You know, it occurs to me this moment in where we are, which has been precipitated by the pandemic, this conversation at any rate, that one of the marvelous outcomes of it is that we are having a felt experience of our shared fate as humanity in a way that perhaps we have not before. And as Jim said, to begin with, it's rocked us to our roots. And the question now is, what shall we do with that? Certainly, we hear and we sense a great a sadness, as Jim pointed out earlier. The number of deaths has risen to 1 million worldwide. The levels of concern, anxiety about survival, given the not only the physical and health challenges that COVID presents, but the emotional and the economic fallout, literally. Jobs disappearing, whole sectors like retail completely upended, which have been, as we know, drivers of capitalism, consumer expenditure. Well, if consumers don't have money to spend, what will happen with that driver? So the implications are profound, and we all know that. The question is, now that we're in touch with our shared fate, what shall we do with it? Shall we contract? Shall we intensify the trend that business in particular, I'll talk about business and commerce because that's our milieu pretty much. We've been on a course for 40 years of predation, domination, profit primacy, elitism, exclusionism. And somehow it managed to maintain a wobbly line of relative stability, but that's cracked. We passed that equilibrium point, and we're faced with this question: what shall we do? Business is responding. The investment markets are responding. Commerce is responding in different ways. And we've seen this as part of a trend. Essentially, since 1999, we've been watching this building tsunami of corporate accountability for the disequilibrium that was eventually going to blow things up.
Elsie, we're having a
Yes.
sound problem.
Oh,
Could you check your microphone? I can hear you, but other people can't. Try it
okay.
again.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep, they say it's back on again. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I will hold this here. Maybe that'll be helpful. And I will attempt to limit my comments here to the 8 minutes so that there's time for conversation. So how is business responding? Business is responding, the investment markets are responding in not so dissimilar ways. There has been the growing awareness that life outside of profits has a material impact on profits. And as Jan talked about, the living system is now asserting itself as a material impact on the investment markets. I don't want to be too cynical about this, but that's how they've looked at sustainability for the past 20 years. How sustainable are our profits? And now that the living system, climate crisis, this health crisis has affected the profitability of companies, you'll see the investment community responding with statements of commitment to environmental, social, and governance risk factors. But still, don't look to them to lead. And don't look at the stock market as any indication of the health of the economy. They will respond to our individual pressure. And with the pain of the pandemic, we have seen those who are at the edge raise their voices for those issues and others that are related to it, such as the grotesque inequality of income, of wealth, of well-being, of access to health, of institutionalized racism, et cetera. So we're all very keenly in touch with the pain of our shared fate. Now, what will we do about it? You will notice business making knee-jerk responses. And here I'm going to ask Rick to put the first slide up. And my challenge to you and my request of you is that you discern the motivation of corporate pronouncements, of stock market and investor pronouncements like BlackRock, et cetera. Discern the motivation behind it. This is, for the past 40 plus years, been the driving impetus of what we'll call financial fundamentalism or profit primacy. Maximize growth, accumulate, it's a win-lose, exclusive protection, and predation. But at the same time, and can we see the next slide, please? Business and commerce have been speaking to us. Rick, will you change the slide? Thank you. As if they're actually committed to sustainable well-being. We're actually predators posing with a veil of compassion. And that's what sustainable branding has been, essentially. So I ask you to discern, look behind the veil of communications and celebrity branding. We know where that's gotten us. And look behind now to impact. Look at and ask, as you look at your investments, as you look at your portfolios, as you look at where you're putting your support, look behind the numbers that say we're contributing this to Sustainable Development Goal X. We have these programs. Look what we're doing in the community. Thank you. But what is your impact on the equilibrium of the living system? I'd like to see that metric, please. And I'd also ask you to take another look a little more deeply at this slide. And this illustrates a few points for me. The other massive change that we have the opportunity to encourage now in corporate behavior and in ourselves is for marketing to step away from the generating appetite, push, and consumption, and step away from the deep knowing that it has of our emotional triggers, and turn the mirror and use that sensitivity that our creative class has, so many of which is in marketing and communications. Turn the mirror and become the empathetic voice of humanity, and bring that back to management, and let management know, you know, this is the pain that's actually out there. What are we doing as a company to address that, apart from impulse purchases, which are becoming more and more addictive online? As marketers, as communications professionals, we have antennae, and we are in many ways creative artists, capable of creating the new dream, of contributing to the new dream. But this is who we've actually been. We've created a generation of celebrity brands. I use the word celebrity in quotes. So in terms of the opportunities for action, there's a lot of good news, and we can talk about that in the conversation later. But if there's one thing that you remember, I hope it's this slide, that we're posing as compassionate predators until we do as Jan talked about, which is to look at the entire ecosystem impact of our behaviors and attach metrics to those, metrics of well-being. What does it mean for a human to be educated for their holistic well-being? What are the metrics and conditions of that? How is what we're doing adding to or detracting from that? What are the metrics and conditions of allowing nature to follow its own natural equilibrium without our intervention? What would that look like? And how can we be us with nature, the living system, and each other, rather than I and me? So if you just go to the next slide, Rick, I think we're setting ourselves up for the larger conversation. We are facing, from the depths of the shared fate, where our egos hopefully are somewhat slaughtered enough, where we're ready to find our hearts, as Karen talked about, our communion, our sense of communion with other. And that's other everything. And from there, ask the question, what is your well-being contingent upon, and how can we organize ourselves to empower that? And so in our work, we are working with those whose hearts are already there, whose leaders already, I recognize, by the way, it's enlightened self-interest to have stable societies. That's apart from the fact there's a license to operate for your corporation. But we're working, as we always do, with those who are on the front edge of embracing what the dream is, what success looks like now. And the best way that we can articulate that is a thriving, naturally flowing, dynamic web of life. It's a big challenge. It's bigger than the moonshot. And it's something that can activate and excite the creative in every one of us. And it's also obviously a business opportunity. I think that we have a narrative here that is about to be born, about the opportunity of thriving together in very tangible terms. So it starts with this felt sense. It's got to be, motivation matters. Every study shows that in any change program. So it's about connecting with that communion sense of identity, system identity. And then to make the leap will require skill, will, and resources. So hopefully together here, we're generating will. Jan and other organizations like WWF have skills, and I know that they do a lot of training and they hold the hands of corporations as corporations build their capacity to make this kind of transition. And in terms of resources, we can talk more about the investment community and what you might be able to do to encourage them. So I think with that, I'll close and look forward to your thoughts.
Elsie, thank you. There are so many phrases that I was writing down. I think for each of us, this phrase, you said, you said for us to look behind the veil for corporations and ask, what is your impact on the equilibrium of the living system? It's such a powerful question, such an extraordinary question. And that when we ask that question, it's also recognizing that we are capable of creating the new dream. So it's both the anger or the fierceness that might come in asking that question, the demand that they wake up, right? That the other wake up. But to do so in such a way that is part of creating the new dream. There's something in there that I'm really now stirring inside of me. Do you have anything else you'd say on that?
Well, I'd just like to add, it may seem big when you look at it conceptually, but there are some marvelous, marvelous examples. And I'll just give you one of them. What if in the desire to start a business, you actually started, sorry, I'll hold this up, this might help. What if you actually started with looking at systems, looking at maybe even a natural system, a forest, and saying, my goal is to preserve this forest, and to think, how could business actually do that? And take a look at what Mandy Cabot and her husband Peter have done with silk grass farms in Belize. Now, these are the people who started the company called Dansko, the shoe company, which now has become employee owned. They built it. They said, okay, great. Now we're going to turn it over to the employees. And Mandy has a wonderful story, and I'm putting it in a chapter to a book that I'm working on right now. But you can go to the website. It's Silk Grass Farms. I think it's .com. They started with, how can we preserve the forest? And they're building a business that will throw off not only the resources to preserve the forest, but the education that's going to allow the local economy and the folks in the local community to develop marketable skills, products and services that are organic, that are nourishing. So the notion of looking at life through a kaleidoscopic lens of, this is the lens, I want to do this. How can I do this in such a way that all of these will thrive on their own natural dynamic?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. It's really that whole system approach rather than looking at the parts and pieces. There's a question in the Q&A. Could it become possible that companies have to commit to certain ecological parameters? And could we have inspectors that check that they're complying? Michelle, I'd like to that's a marvelous question and a complex one, and one that Elsie and I and others could answer for it could be in dialogue about and conversation forever. I do want to say just one small response to it, which is that one leverage point that we have is as consumers. So we can look for the companies that are actually already committed to certain ecological parameters, like the cradle-to-cradle certification that I mentioned earlier, so that when we recently bought a pad for our rug, instead of just going online and buying a pad or going to a local store, I looked for a cradle-to-cradle certified rug pad, and I was able to order it very effortlessly. So that what that will do is that will reinforce and drive our dollars towards those companies that are already committed to certain ecological parameters, and they do have an inspector system in place to maintain the certification. So that was something to consider. I think now, Elsie, thank you so much. I'll turn the mic over to Lisa Raffel. Lisa is a dear friend and an artist who's joining the panel with her spoken word song, Now is the Time. Lisa will help us remember how important and valuable we each are in creating the world that we want to live in. As a grandmother of 7, Lisa is a composer, playwright, poet, chantress, spiritual teacher, and sound and energy healer, who's deeply concerned about the health and well-being of future generations. So Lisa, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Karen. I'm loving this panel. I'm so deeply honored to be a part of it and to be hearing this from women's voices. Very powerful. I also want to thank Jim for creating this remarkable opportunity, and to Karen for hosting this so graciously. I'm going to share my screen and show the video. I'm going to have an abrupt ending on the video because I don't want to include a tag that has me talking. So I hope you enjoy. But I don't know what to do, so I've decided I'm going to talk to you. There are people who forget that nature must thrive. Those people don't see what's right before their eyes, that our planet is polluted. It affects your life and mine. What can we do? That is the question of our time. That's the question of our time. Nature's the source of our living will. When we're born, she's in us in every cell. She's the force moving forward. She's what keeps us alive. She gives us our answers through the earth and the sky. Pay attention to the earth and the sky. When we forget, when we forget to be grateful, we forget to be kind. When we forget to be grateful, we forget we're alive. We forget we're alive. We forget. This is our story, yours and mine, and the story of our children's children. You and I, can we protect their lives? That's the question of our time. Life is filled with choices. It's for more than to just survive. We're creatures of hope. We strive to create, to do something that matters before we reach our grave. But to nature, it's simple. It's in nature's call to exist. We exist. We exist for us all. When we forget to be grateful, we forget to be kind. When we forget to be grateful, we forget to be kind. When we don't use our voice, we forget we're alive. If we forget and destroy, it affects all our lives. It affects all our lives. When nature's destroyed, if you think we're still safe, that's a lie. If we lose touch with grace, we grow or we die. There's no room for doubt. Hoping won't help us. The only way out is to see that we're here, where we are and what's right. Now is the time to put up a fight. Put up a fight. Remember, if we let nature thrive, we grow more alive. Let's use our voice. Don't give up or deny that this is the question of our time. This is the question of our time. Nature's the heartbeat. do you see? At stake is our children's destiny. Out of our will lies the future we birth. The truth is around us, we're in heaven on earth. The truth is around us, we're in heaven on earth. The truth is inside us. Don't forget to be grateful, don't forget to be kind. Don't forget to be grateful, don't forget to be kind. Don't forget.
So I hope that came across well. Karen, are you there? Yes, okay, I can hear you. So the power of the arts, I just want to, do you want to say something, Karen, from seeing it before I go on, or?
Oh goodness, Lisa, there's so much to be said. I'd say if you'd like to speak for another minute or two, and then I'll move into our common conversation about the kind of wisdom that is in this and in all of us.
Great, thank you. I want to talk for a moment about the power of the arts and the capacity it has to touch into the emotion. You know, you were talking, Jan, about story and the ability to tell a story through words. You know, the language that we're using right now around the world is kind of like a pandemic unto itself. It's all about fear and how we bring fear into our body and how that infects our own body and our organs. And we are creating this disease inside of us by the fear that we're talking about. So, you know, fear creates chaos. The language of defense creates injustice. The language of righteousness creates inequality. And we are in a language of crisis, which is overwhelming our nervous system. So as we talk about this wisdom, I'm going to put out into the conversation to really support the language of connection and the caring for our children and grandchildren, which is a common language, and how if we focus on really loving the earth, recognizing its beauty, recognizing that it is what's making us alive for our children, then perhaps we can find common dialogue across these great divides of how people are exploiting and also dividing us further. So I want to put that into the conversation.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. It brings tears to my eyes, the language of connection and how we've been promulgating the language of fear. And how available to us at any moment is the language of connection, the language of love. What a practice, what a place that is for us to grow into, to choose, to step into, and step up to.
Yeah, you know, when we talk about love, when it comes to our children and grandchildren, to their health and their well-being and future generations' well-being, I think that is. I find that very powerful as a grandmother. I find that very powerful when I talk to people who are what I would call on the other side of my perception of what I think is the right action. And when we talk about children, there is certainly a bridge that is making, at least in my conversations, a big difference.
Yes, yes. And I think I just wrote in the chat that it's the children, because you're blessed to have 7 grandchildren. I'm blessed now with one new grandchild, and others may not have children of their own or grandchildren, and yet all of us are children of the earth. We wouldn't be alive except for the miracle of this earth sphere that we are blessed to live on, with this extraordinarily perfect atmosphere and abundant soil such that we have food available to us. So Rick, could we bring on Elsie and Jan as well? And we'll move into the next section here. And Jan, if you want to turn your video on, there we go. There we go, yeah. As I spoke about earlier, I have a real passion for wisdom. I do. I see that we have been bringing our thinking to an awful lot of our decisions and our choices over the years. We haven't necessarily known how to access our wisdom and how to settle back into the wisdom that is available to each of us, that can help us move and work in sync with nature's ways, that can help us guide our companies, design our companies from the beginning for the preservation and restoration of life, that can help us redesign food systems for the preservation and restoration of life. So my question for you is, what is your wisdom? And how does your wisdom, this will be fairly brief given our time, but how does your wisdom inform your leadership? How do you nurture and support that wisdom? Elsie, would you start?
I'm thinking you can see my eyes rolling around in my head here. Usually, I guess this is a human thing. I do have practices. It really helps for me to keep my practices. Otherwise, I usually come back to seeking my wisdom after I've been unwise and am suffering a consequence. So that's my impetus for keeping with my practices. And I'm talking about practices of quieting that wonderful mind that we have. And behind that noise, there is, for me, what works is embodying a sense of stillness. And for me also, embodying is really the key. Otherwise, my mind loves to do things. It loves to jump around. I like doing things. And I see the parallels with our society. We like to do things. We like to create AI and machine learning. The question is, it will be replicating our state of mind. Unless, and what state of mind would we like that to replicate? So for myself, it's practices, it's meditating. And the only thing that keeps me doing that is I make commitments to other people that I'll be leading it. So I lead meditations daily. That's one example.
I understand. Big commitments help us design our practices and sustain our practices. Yeah, thank you so much. Jan, how about you?
So I feel like I'm still in the heavy accumulation phase of acquiring wisdom. So hopefully, I think we all are probably.
I think we all are.
I think that listening to other voices and listening to nature is a great way to acquire wisdom. And I think of nature a lot in the way it renews itself and it regenerates constantly. And it has cycles of up and down and life and death. But it's continually, regenerating, and nature requires cooperation, and there aren't borders with nature. And so if you think about nature as a really powerful role model, and how we can apply it to our work and our life, there's always, I think, hope. And I feel like I have to look for hope, because in this line of work, there's a lot of reasons for pessimism, but nature is a great teacher when it comes to, clinging to life and survival and hope. So that's, I think, whether it's meditation or just taking a walk on the beach or, going for a paddle down the river on a kayak, I think that's one of the greatest fonts of wisdom for me.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jan. When I first started researching wisdom over 20 years ago, interviewed a whole bunch of different people. I said, okay, what is wisdom to you? How do we know when somebody's wise? How do we know when we're wise? Everybody knows when they're unwise, as Elsie said, but we don't always know when we're wise. And Randy Hayes, who I've known for a long time, who started Rainforest Action Network, said to me, when you are wise, you are in sync with nature's ways. In sync with nature's ways. And that has been a real benchmark for me, or a starting point and an ending point to assess, am I in a place where I am in my wisdom? Am I in sync with nature's ways, with the choices that I'm making?
I'm writing that down. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And Lisa, how about you?
Oh, I love that. I think I consider nature as my, she's my home. She's my role model. She's my teacher. She's the place of beauty. So I learned how to see beauty through nature, and the capacity of being able to feel nature. So it's not just seeing her, it's being in her presence and feeling her. And you get that through gratitude. When you're next to the tree and you're grateful for the tree, you feel an energetic experience that is homing. It brings you into a deeper sense of yourself as an organic person. So you become more at home in yourself when you are at home with nature. And that feeling sense comes with gratitude. And so I think the greatest wisdom we can have toward each other and toward the planet is gratitude. Yeah. So that we really open into that still place that you're talking about, Elsie. To me, that's what gratitude brings me to. It brings me to silence. It's like awe. It just brings me to awe and silence. So yeah, it's more of a shamanic way of understanding it, because I believe in the living quality of the energies having presence with me.
I can feel the living quality of the energy, our presence, that we are here today as we are connected. And we're here on behalf of the earth and the people of the earth. And it reminds me of my sister-in-law came up with a bumper sticker some of you may have seen around years ago, which is kindness is everything.
Mm-hmm.
So in addition to gratitude, I know when I'm wise, when I'm kind. And that might mean that I say no. It might mean that I cut something. It's not always ooey gooey, but there's a fundamental kindness in the center of that wisdom. So that brings me to the final part of this conversation, which is the conversation about commitment and the power of commitment. And as we know our commitments, the way we stand differently in the world versus when we're floating around, worrying, wondering, thinking, trying. It's really different when we come into what matters most to us. If you'll remember at the beginning, I said a leader is someone with the willingness and ability to act on that which matters most to them. Mm-hmm. Well, what matters most to you is your commitment. It can be expressed in a core commitment. So I would like to invite each of you that are on the session with us to put your commitment in the chat. What is your commitment going forward from today? And maybe this time I'll start with you, Lisa. What is your commitment going forward from today?
I feel my best resource within me is my capacity to create spoken word, events, plays, things that bring people into an emotional context with their awareness. And I'm committed right now to get people to vote and to vote for the planet. Aside from political parties, just get the people who support environment protection into office. And we know who they are and we know who they're not.
Thank you. I feel the power of your commitment. And I know you have actions that are backing that.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. We have in the chat a commitment to our youngest and new parents in coming back to nature, a commitment to imagine and create a world in sync with nature,
Mhm.
a commitment to Mother Earth, who gave me life, and I give her mine. As she leads me, so shall I follow and strive to thrive. A commitment to not give up, a commitment to make positive stories, a commitment to continue helping people find each other, a whole earth catalog of people, a commitment to imagine a new future they're pouring in. Jan, what is your commitment going forward from today?
My commitment from today is to dig more deeply into the excellent work of the fellow panelists on here that I've learned from. And, you know, my work is very science-based, and there are obviously so many ways to express your support for nature and renewing our shared planet. And so I think I'm going to spend some time getting to know the work of these really impressive women more deeply and incorporate some of that into my work.
We look forward to that. Thank
I
you.
look forward to that. Thank you.
And Elsie, how about you?
Well, my first commitment is to be as responsive and helpful to Jan as I can be in that. My commitment out of today is to, from my whatever seed of wisdom I can muster, is to prioritize my actions so that they are more precisely focused on the impact that I can have on the equilibrium of the living system.
Mhm.
So to do what I was requesting everybody do, but in a way that will affect my next few months.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. A couple other commitments in the chat. Oh my God. My commitment is to share nature's voice through creativity and activism. My commitment is to access and follow my inner guidance and nature's genius. I'm committed to developing more partnerships with people and themselves and with people and nature. I am committed to life. I'm committed to no judgments. I'm committed to sharing light and love. My commitment is to step into quiet leadership in our community and to help others to envision a different future. My commitment, so thank you to all of you in the chat, and there are many more beautiful commitments that are there. I concur with that last one. I continue in my commitment to develop wise leaders who have the capacity to consciously bring themselves to their work each day with a willingness, with increased ability, and with practices and a context within which their wisdom really comes forward and can be the source for action. And I want to thank you, Jim Garrison and Rick for the tech support, and Jim for the Ubiquity University and the Humanity Rising Global Solutions Summit, and all you do to support our wisdom and to bring forward the development of wisdom and to bring forward the leaders who are going to be the wise leaders coming forward into the future. I acknowledge your commitment and I appreciate it very much. Thank you. Thank you for this time. And thank you to everyone who's listening now and is going to be listening as this continues out into the ethers. I appreciate it. So Sabina, let me turn it back over to you if I may.
Thank you so much, Karen, and to each and every one of you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, for sharing your commitment, and for really showcasing the role models and leaders that you are, because it truly is through dialogue like this when we also can hear and listen to wisdom being conveyed, and also committable wisdom, that can create both inspirations and ripples of impact of others. And there was such a palette of wisdom and insight that came through. So just a few things that sort of melodically I found were so beautiful for us all to really take with us. And that is, become the empathetic voice of humanity. Such a beautiful sentence. And to align with the language of connection. We've talked a lot about that on Humanity Rising, the narrative of connection, because that is essentially what we want, why we're here, to connect and belong, not least. And also the essential reminder and commitment that you all have emphasized so clearly and so beautifully. Our future is fundamentally linked to our relationship and nature. And I'm sure that everyone who is listening to this knows this, but then that we also are the leaders who need to echo this, both in our actions, but also how we may facilitate or inspire other people's actions or wordings or messaging, and really emphasize that clear connection with nature. I mean, we will be looking back a few years on and just wondering, how could we be so disconnected, because it is such a natural part of us, but we are learning. And as Jan said, see nature as a role model and teacher of life. And thank you, Lisa, for reminding us of the power of art, and that beautiful, beautiful video echoing the words that we forget to be grateful, we forget to be kind. Don't forget to be grateful. Don't forget to be kind. That is so, so true. And also the importance, Karen, of accessing our wisdom. And by doing that, also in sync with ourselves, in sync with nature, that inner rhythm that really is how we thrive in life. And in the introduction, Karen, you advise us to stay anchored in the sense of what is possible and what we can do. And it sort of reminded me already then of a serenity prayer that I'm sure many of you already be doing. And I say it every day, and I just wanted to sort of remind it. It's grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So with that, be kind, be grateful. Thank you so much to all of you, beautiful souls, leaders, and also for all the people in the chats who have also been so engaged. And I hand it over to Jim.
That was a beautiful summary, Sabina. Thank you. And Karen, I just have to say, you have convened 3 panels now, and each one of them have been superb gathering of women, and it brings me back to my original intuition that I talked about before. When the pandemic was deepening in March, April, I went through a thought experiment and said to myself, if I was dictator for a day and I could make one decision that could turn the world around, what would it be? And I would decree that within the next 30 days, every government and organization in the world would turn over its executive leadership to women till 2030. And we're reminded again today, everyone, I think of the deep sobriety of women pondering the world and what we need to do. And Karen, your deep commitment to wisdom, that's at the origins of the Western tradition, the philosopher, the lover of wisdom, the lover of that disposition of being that can see ourselves as relative to a larger whole rather than absolute. And that relativity gives us naturally the virtue and the upwelling of compassion, kindness, and tolerance to the larger world. Just think, everybody, just for a moment. What if Karen Buckley replaced Trump?
Yay!
I mean, just think that thought. And Jan, senior advisor to the World Wildlife Fund, if you just took over, next Monday as the secretary of the Department of the Interior?
Yay!
Think of how the world would change. Think of how the United States would change simply by installing women who are consciously pursuing wisdom into executive leadership. And I say this not as some idealized fantasy projection. I think it's a national security issue. And literally the fate of the earth, I think, depends on the radical and immediate elevation of women into leadership. So I just want to acknowledge everything you've done, Karen, and welcome you. Jan, I would love to do a whole session if you would be interested with the World Wildlife Fund. I mean, the fund brought out a couple of weeks ago, we've lost 68% of all the mammals, birds, fishes on Earth since 1970. I mean, that fact alone is mind-boggling and has to be turned around. So, I mean, if that's something of interest, and Lisa, your music was beautiful. If anytime you want to do a performance on Humanity Rising, be in touch. We love the arts.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next week, we're going to have an artist singing and doing a whole performance in conjunction with Get Out the Vote.
Great.
Critical in terms of the U.S. election. And my commitment, Karen, is along with Rick and Sabinia and the staff at Ubiquity, is to keep Humanity Rising going for as long as we possibly can. Because I think what we've been able to develop is a real forum within the context of which we can have deep conversations that matter and then transform them into actions that can truly make a difference. And as long as we can do that, as long as we can just keep bringing together human goodness in the world, somehow in a way that's beyond our wildest imaginations, I believe that the spirit that guides all sentient life is working through us and through the present moment for a unfolding that is going to redeem us all. And you today have contributed mightily to that redemption. And I want to thank you for it and thank the panel. And then tomorrow, Humanity Rising rolls ever onward. And we're going to have a dialogue with Jonathan Porritt in the UK, who is one of the founders of the Green Party in the UK now over 30 years ago, and has been active in green politics, was active in the struggle against Brexit, has just come out with a new book, has a lot to say about Trump and the US election and Brexit and how social media was used in both the phenomenon of Trump and the phenomenon of Brexit to divide the public and manipulate the electorate. So Jonathan Porritt is a very timely speaker as we contemplate the unfolding events in the world. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same station, as that's at 5:00 p.m. Central European Time here on Zoom. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.